welcome everybody to the League of Women Voters of Brookline's third Friday session. Today, our topic is housing in Brookline and affordable housing in particular. And the purpose is to sort of get us up to date basically and cover some of the items that were voted at town meeting, to see where they're going and how much more things we need to learn as we go forward, but also where we stand at the moment. So we have Roger Blood, the chair of the Housing Advisory Board, whose mission it is to support affordable housing in Brookline through a variety of means, which I will allow the chair to explain. And he can help us bring us up to date on several warrant articles that were approved at town meeting. And we'll discuss some of the issues that were raised as a result of the discussions at town meeting having to do with housing production and affordable housing in Brookline. And maybe we'll get a little bit of an update. There was some legislation passed at the end of the session in Massachusetts, which I do not believe has been signed yet. I know that somewhat controversially, and this is for a league position, the climate legislation that had been approved by the legislature was not signed by the governor, and apparently now has to go back to the House, go back to the legislature, which is starting a brand new two-year session, I think, in the coming week. Therefore, none of those proposed legislation impacts will be felt until after it gets approved by the next legislative. I'm talking about the climate legislation that was supported by the league in the Massachusetts legislature, but it's a sort of an example of if the governor doesn't sign it, the legislation then is reintroduced to the next session of the Massachusetts legislature, which will start, I believe, next week. Anyway, we don't know about the housing items yet. All right, having said all of the above, I welcome you, Roger Blood, and hope that you will be able to bring us up to date about anything that's happened since the town meeting. And in particular, the Housing Advisory Board was subject of at least one piece of vote at the town meeting. So I offer you the pulpit, so to speak. Welcome, Roger.
Well, thank you, Betsy, and thank you, Ernie, and good morning, everybody else who's participating. Thank you for having me. It's a timely moment to discuss what's happening now in Brookline regarding affordable housing and what the Housing Advisory Board's work has recently entailed, and perhaps more important, what we're doing now and what's coming in 2021 to the extent we can foresee. For those of you that may not be familiar with the Housing Advisory Board itself, I'll just say real quickly, it was formed about almost 35 years ago now under my predecessor, the original chair, David Treach. The HAB, in addition to providing housing policy advice and planning support for the select board and town meeting and the planning board, we have the specific responsibilities for administering, overseeing the inclusionary zoning in the town that's been operating for quite some time, and we are also the trustees, fiduciaries of the Brookline Affordable Housing Trust. Any one of either of those two subjects could be the entire subject of a session such as this, but we'll take a pass for current activities. What I'm going to do in a hopefully a reasonably brief time here is go through very quickly the warrant articles that were housing related in town meeting that the Housing Advisory Board dealt with, and give you a sense of what they were and where they are at the moment. But I'm not going to dwell on them. That part of my presentation is going to be more maybe to stimulate your thoughts or questions at the end. I'll cover a couple of important items briefly. The first one you see on your screen now, relating to the magic 10% goal under Chapter 40B. That's an item of extreme current interest. and then a little bit about what we've done with the affordable housing lotteries, but all of that leading into what I think and hope will be the main focus of at least my remarks. And that relates to just now we're undertaking an update of what's called the town's housing production plan, and so we'll go into that in some more detail. And it'll give you a real an opening on something that is just beginning and will be taking place with a lot of public engagement over this full coming calendar year. So just to begin, the state sets a bogey of 10% of our affordable of our housing stock as a goal to be counted by the state as affordable housing. We've got about a little over 26,000 housing units in town. So when the state grants the status of affordable to a little over 2,600 of those units, we're above that 10%, and that's really important because while all of us want to promote good affordable housing, I think almost everybody in town prefers that the town sets its own course for the most part in what's good and what we want and how and where we want it, as opposed to when we're less than the 10%, the state pretty much can tell us and the developers what to do, and it's often larger and sometimes inappropriate. So we're at a really critical moment right now, and even as we speak almost this week, we had officially gone over the 10% and had a small celebration in a way about in mid 2020, but in the last week or two, because of the way the complicated rules work on the way the state counts affordable housing, several or two particular projects fell out of the count because they failed to continue in a timely fashion, moving from the various building permit phase into construction and completion. And if they, under the state's rules, if you don't do that in a timely manner, sometimes lawsuits delay, sometimes the approval or planning process delays that sequence, and projects can fall out and then come back later. So we are now, unfortunately, instead of a little over 10%, we are back at 9.9% and just 26 units short of the 10%. And so those of us that are on the front line on this are looking very closely at the individual projects that that not only caused us to fall back, but which one or ones will be the most likely, and how soon will they be reinstated and get us back over the so-called SHI, subsidized housing inventory, to get us in what's known as a safe harbor, which puts the control back in the hands of the town and our ZBA.
Roger,
So,
I don't want to interrupt you, but would you mind explaining what it is about 40Bs that is so critical and significant? The status of a 40B project is that it can ignore local zoning.
right. It's if we're not at the 10%, the developer, if they don't get what they want from Brookline, they the pattern is they propose something much larger, and the state is more inclined to be relaxed in the size and scope of a project. It's all under zoning, and it's a matter of the zoning allowing the state to override what our local community thinks would be a good size and scale and design of a project. So one other thing I'd just like to touch on briefly that was has been of quite some interest. We're going to talk mostly about production of housing, but diversity of who gets to live in Brookline's affordable housing has become of an increasing concern and attention, both in the community and at the Housing Advisory Board. And one of the things the HAB is responsible for in that regard is the rules for running affordable housing lotteries. Some of those, the HAB, we administer directly ourselves, but also these rules would apply to the nonprofits such as 2 Life and like the senior housing that just was completed at JFK Crossing, and also even the 40Bs. So the state has some baseline rules, but the town has some latitude within those to advance what we want in terms of our own affordable housing policy. So historically, Brookline and just about every other community in Massachusetts that runs affordable housing lotteries has, without really questioning this, has reserved 70% of the affordable units being brought up available of the total under something that's known as local preference. The 70% number is simply the maximum that the state allows local communities to require or to set as their standard. But anything less than 70, from 0 to 70, a community can choose. Really hasn't been questioned much before. A lot of communities have looked at this. We had an excellent study done by one of our housing division staff people that analyzed our previous lotteries and looked at the results of other towns and then kind of did a what if exercise if we had a lower local preference requirement. Essentially, it means that we run 2 lotteries. We first draw the winners under the local preference pool of otherwise qualified candidates. And then when that's exhausted, the remaining 30% is for non-local preference. What does local preference mean very quickly? Primarily, it's people who already live in Brookline, but it's not just that. The 70% also includes at Brookline's, we added quite some years ago, Metco parents, and also employees of the town, employees of the housing authority, and actually now people who live or who also work in town. So after we received the study at the request of the Housing Advisory Board, we knew that we wanted to go to a lower percentage. The individual preferences at the Housing Advisory Board ran everywhere from 0 to 50, and we came with unanimity to a recommendation that we reduce the 70 to 25%. Everybody pretty much felt that we should retain some local preference because there can be some critical needs here for doing that. And that recommendation was adopted and approved by the Planning Board and the Select Board. So if you have questions about that, when later we can discuss any of that further. So just going hopefully fairly quickly through the housing related articles that appeared at this town meeting, a record number. The HAB looked at more than you're seeing here and decided that that these 6 subjects were sufficiently important to housing and affordable housing that the HAB went ahead and held public hearings, which are required if we are to, and we or any board are to make a recommendation on behalf of the HAB to the town meeting. So the first article, which was actually sponsored by the HAB, was to strengthen the town's inclusionary zoning. Again, this could be a subject of a long discussion. Suffice it to say that we at the HAB are in the partway through a multiple stage process, bringing articles to to town meeting, and also some of this has to be approved by the planning board to strengthen our inclusionary zoning. What Article 7 did mainly was two things. One was to raise by 1/3 after we had a deep consulting modeling and analysis. We made an across-the-board increase of the fees that under some project circumstances developers would pay into our housing trust. The
Roger,
other thing
you
we're
need
doing,
to explain what is inclusionary zoning, please. Not everybody understands that.
Sure. So the inclusionary zoning, which, as I mentioned earlier, was passed many years ago, and a lot of cities and towns in Massachusetts and around the country have similar policies, programs. It's part of our zoning here, is where a developer wants to build a multifamily project and get a special permit for that purpose. We have a set of requirements embedded in our zoning that they have to, an affordable housing obligation is triggered as part of the process. Baseline requirement is that 15% of the total units need to be affordable, and there's a lot of rules surrounding that. But there are circumstances under which, either in part or in whole, the developer can make a significant contribution to the housing trust fund, also administered by the HAB, in which case the HAB has and does use those funds to leverage other projects. The Housing Authority being a great partner with us, and also nonprofits like Two Life and Beaver Senior Life to do all affordable units. So the only other thing we did with the inclusionary zoning in this phase, and we'll be coming back with more in the spring and beyond, is to, for the first time, target the income ranges and the income limits for people who benefit from these programs, so that the home ownership programs, affordable, which are far less in volume, will target a somewhat higher range of incomes than the rental housing, which is tends to be a lower range of incomes. We've not done that before, but there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. Article 8. Oh, so the Article 7 was approved almost unanimously by the town meeting. Excuse me. Article 8 was to expand the Housing Advisory Board, which had traditionally been 7 members, mostly appointed by the Select Board. Last year, it went to 8 when there were some formal changes made where we needed to add a Select Board member. We now have Select Board member Heather Hamilton is a member of the HAB. And then this warrant article was a citizen article to expand the HAB to, well, it was a modified version that got approved. We're going from 8 to 10 members with a goal to increase our racial and ethnic diversity. And we are currently working to implement and fill the 2 additional seats. Articles 9, 10, and 11 were a package relating to short-term rentals, known in vernacular, much of it being so-called Airbnb. The HAB was interested in that because there were a large number of units in our existing valuable housing stock that were being removed, and this is a global phenomenon, for the purpose of converting and using them in a commercial sense for transient small hotel type use. And the HAB took a position that while a restrictive version of short-term rentals might be okay in terms of room rentals, that it's questionable policy for a place like Brookline to be removing valuable full apartment units for this commercial purpose. So we supported a more restrictive version than what was originally presented. It appeared to be on the verge of passage, but there were some maneuvers in a way, and it went back to a study committee, which is chaired by, many of you know, Paula Friedman is chairing that with another good group of people. So that'll be back in the spring. Oops. Article 12, this was an easy one for the HAB. The Community Preservation Act has been around a long time. About half of the cities and towns in Massachusetts have adopted it. Brookline has previously brought it forward at a maximum level of allowable. It's a property tax surcharge, and it didn't pass. But this time, we have every reason to think that it will pass. It's a proposal for an annual 1% surcharge on almost everybody's annual property tax, an annual surcharge which will be allowable under the state law, the so-called CPA, to be used for affordable or so-called community housing, green space, open space, and historic preservation. That again, I think it would be great if the league wanted to have a whole session on that, because there's a lot to it. It's important. It'll go to the voters in May, and for the moment, the HAB enthusiastically supported it, and town meeting overwhelmingly voted to recommend it to the voters. Article 27, kind of a strange story here. Reauthorizing micro housing units. Micro housing units are simply small apartments, typically under 500 square feet, and they had always been just done in Brookline wherever they were needed. They were totally legal. When a zoning overlay down on the so-called River Road or Emerald Island was passed, a couple of years ago now, I guess, accidentally, when micro housing units were specifically defined separately for the first time from just other housing units, just for that River Road area. Nobody realized that by doing that, it effectively made them unauthorized everywhere else, because you can't do something once it's defined unless it's authorized for whatever zoning area it's going in. So technical issue became a big debate in town meeting. I won't go into that now, but basically it was referred back to the planning department. The Housing Advisory Board supports micro units. They have a place in the market. And we hope it's brought back for potential use in good projects. The fear that they will overrun Brookline if they're allowed, we feel is unfounded. And so I think that's where that one stands at the moment. Finally, Article 34, it's a resolution, non-binding, but to be taken quite seriously, as resolutions are. Brought forward by a group called Brookline for Everyone, and also supported by Build Better Brookline. And I know Jonathan Klein is on the meeting this morning, who leads that group. And it's a resolution. It's quite elaborate, and again could be the subject of a long discussion. I think there's about a dozen whereases in it, and we could talk more about it if you want at the end. But it's basically a resolution to set ambitious housing goals, more specifically to put the town on a path to rezone in a way that realistically can implement those housing goals. And then, very important, and this article was the result of over a year of dialogue between the proponents, the sponsors, and the Housing Advisory Board itself. And the article seeks for the town through the HAB and the planning department to update the town's what's called a housing production plan. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So that's a great segue. And a modified version of Article 34 was approved by town meeting after quite a bit of debate at not with the HAB, but with the select board and the advisory committee. So the next few slides will be about the housing production plan. And again, certainly invite questions when we're done. And this is the last piece of my presentation, but the largest. The term housing production plan is a term of coming from the state through Chapter 40B. And the main purpose, which I'll go through on this slide, has to do with giving cities and towns an opportunity for an orderly path if they haven't achieved the 10%, to get to the 10% in an orderly way where they're not overrun by undesirable projects imposed by the state. So nearly 5 years ago, we're into the, well, 5 years ago, we undertook a housing production plan here, a very formal, elaborate process in 2016, and it was finished in October, and officially, from the state's perspective, the HPPs, I'll just call them HPPs now to make this shorter, are effective for 5 years. So I've already kind of mentioned that that HPP, which will be in effect until this coming October of 21 officially, was to secure the temporary safe harbor status, subject to our making annual progress benchmarks every year. We could control our own destiny on proposed projects, as we discussed earlier. So now we have decided, and the HAB has urged and promoted this for somewhat different reasons, and really tying directly also to the resolution under Article 34, which had broad support. We're now launching another formal HPP, which is to update and expand upon and really further articulate all the strategies and goals that were set forth in the current HPP. But it's really to recognize that we're at this juncture where we're passing this critical 10% threshold, where we're going to want to have a plan more for our own real planning purposes than just to check the boxes and to please the state. Couple of critical aspects of the plan. We will be engaging, as we did before, a qualified consulting team. And as we speak, the HAB has been working with staff for the last couple of months to develop a good, robust, it's called Request for Proposals, or RFP, that we'll be sending out in a couple of weeks. We're going before the select board to just discuss it with them. They don't have to approve it, but we're right at that juncture now where this is a great time for you to know what we're doing. Critical part of the housing production plan will be very extensive community engagement in a lot of different ways. It'll be a challenge while we're still subject to pandemic constraints and Zoom, but a good consultant should be able to overcome that. There, some of you may remember there was a lot of large meetings and different surveys and engagement when we went through this in 2016. We want to do it even more so this time. Our goal is to complete the preliminary draft of the HPP by the end of this calendar year, and to have, but to more quickly, to have a consultant on board by the end of March. The retention of a consultant and the engagement is in itself kind of an elaborate process. One of the points along the way that I think is worth mentioning as a sort of a foundational look at Brookline in relation to where we are and what things that the housing production plan would be able to build on. The Boston Foundation produces annually Greater Boston Housing Report Card. Housing folks really look at this as kind of a Bible of where things are in Greater Boston, and communities look at it for guidance and insights. That report sets forth 6 best practices for municipalities to look at themselves in the mirror regarding proactive affordable housing policies and programs. And you can see the list of, well, you'll see 5 of 6 there. And you can think for yourself where we are in Brookline, where we check the boxes. We certainly have plenty of existing zoning for multifamily housing. Lots of cities and towns of the 351 don't have any. Number 2, zoning for accessory dwelling units. The Hab brought an article forward. Well, we tried 10 years ago. It failed. 2 years ago, we brought another accessory dwelling unit article, and that's something that allows small apartments in single family homes under zoning, which had been prohibited. And it was passed overwhelmingly by town meeting. So we have that up and running. It may need some further improvement, but it's there and it's workable. Inclusionary zoning bylaws, we've had those for over 30 years. They've been very active and are and will continue to produce affordable housing. Zoning for mixed use development. We do have that, but a real focus of the housing production plan is going to be looking at that subject very intensely and how to make that one come alive and be more productive, not just for housing, but for economic development. Finally, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I mentioned it earlier. It's quite active. The Community Preservation Act will bring, if approved, substantial additional fund infusion into that. But we have taken in about $15 million into the fund and deployed about $11 million to date for some pretty good projects. So the sixth best practice is that we don't have on the books yet is the Community Preservation Act. So perhaps if we're talking again mid-year or next year, we'll be 6 out of 6. The housing production plan, the RFP and the work program is pretty elaborate, but for purposes of this morning, I'll just mention that it includes 5 major tasks. The first being to develop and implement a robust public engagement process that engages with the widest possible range of residents in a range of also different types of forums. The second is kind of a statistical exercise. It's quite important for baseline, but required for this this exercise. We are going to want to get the state to approve this when we're done again, and it's to update a comprehensive housing needs assessment. What ranges of income, what types of populations, et cetera, statistically and otherwise have the greatest needs. Third is to formulate affordable housing goals. These are partly numerical, but not entirely. And again, you can relate this back to the Article 34 resolution of town meeting. Number 4, updating the housing production strategies. And I have another slide to give you an idea of what that we think that's going to entail. And finally, the 5th task is to develop and test specific location-based, meaning things you can see on a map, recommendations for housing production, including zoning recommendations, not the actual zoning bylaw, but the framework for specific zoning recommendations. That's new. That's not something that's in the last housing production plan. Excuse me. So the consultant's work plan is going to include these location-based recommendations for housing production, including zoning, for a fair number of opportunity areas, probably at least a dozen and maybe more. And these, once these are identified as suitable, potentially suitable areas, subject to, again, public input and engagement, the analysis is going to include a variety of sort of non-housing factors: accessibility and neighborhood compatibility, climate sustainability for sure, commercial area vitality, alternative uses, fiscal impacts, kind of a balancing between encouraging commercial development on the one hand, which is a very high positive fiscal impact, and housing, which is far less so, and then affordable housing, which is kind of neutral. We want to then have a quantitative projection of how many housing units we are going to set as a goal. It will be annual, but basically there'll be a 5 and 10 year time frame for the production goals. And I mentioned that there'll be a lot of focus on zoning and rezoning and the concept of an overlay district where, again, we could talk a lot about that on another occasion. There's things called 40R, which sets a whole district out and says in detail what will be built in it that would overlay more simplified things on the zoning map. And finally, this is something that I'm pretty excited about. The town has a new model that was developed by some Harvard Business School people last year. We're calling it the FBM model, meaning the fiscal and build out model. And it is going to be a very sophisticated and kind of robust way to test different build out scenarios and frame possible zoning action for these individual opportunity areas. And those areas on the map will be either pieces of the mixed use corridors going up and down Route 9, Beacon Street, and the like, where there's already commercial and housing uses, and other town and privately owned major parcels or multiple parcels. One example being municipal parking lots. As some of you may know, we have a pilot example of that where we're well along the way to doing some senior housing over with a nonprofit sponsor over a municipal parking lot just across from the Brookline Village T-stop on Station Street. So the strategies will include a piece of fair housing, which is very, very important. I haven't gone into detail about that here, but there's a lot to that. And public education about fair housing and affordable housing. Always a priority for the HAB, along with new housing, affordable housing, is the preservation of what we have. That's not essentially the physical preservation, although that's part of it. It's making sure that the legal status and the availability for limited income people of the existing affordable housing continues in perpetuity. Then, of course, increased production of both affordable and total housing units, increased resources, that's financial resources, including right at home in the housing division of our planning department, and capacity building, which has a lot of meanings, but it means the ability to do all the things we're talking about here, including production. Where it's important that we are going to be having the housing production plan coordinated with two other very important studies that are being undertaken as we speak by the planning department and its staff. There's a multifamily housing study. Obviously, that is an important connection with housing production planning, and a parking demand study. Parking is very costly, and there is a real concern that there may be too much parking demanded now going into the future, especially as it affects the cost of creating housing and therefore the ability to produce affordable housing. And finally, the strategy will include how to use zoning overlays and collaborative, or what many people call friendly, Chapter 40Bs. This is in a post 10% environment where we're not under the thumb of the state. And so that can produce generate a variety of new housing stock, and especially with a focus on both mixed use, housing and commercial, and mixed income, meaning market rate, middle income, and lower income in the same project. I hope I haven't gone on too long here, and hope you find this sort of overview stimulating for questions, which maybe can be the best part of our session.
Right, and I think it would help, since we're in a situation where I think you can put questions in the chat, which will help us if we get duplicates, but I'll also see if we can do something where you raise your hand and we'll unmute you. There's a group, the group's not too large to do that. And just a couple of comments about part of the presentation. One thing to be aware of is that when we talk about this state legislation called 40B. It permits development-driven, a developer, let's put it this way, when we are eligible for 40Bs, the project can be developer-driven, or there can be such a thing as a friendly 40B. The development at St. Aidan's Church in Brookline was a very successful friendly 40B in which the town was a partner with the property owner and served as we collaborated on the development of that project. An unfriendly one is more likely to be developer driven, which is to say the developer's goal is to meet their own normal, I'm going to call it economic goals, which would not necessarily coincide with the town's goals for mixed use or mixed income and those kinds of things. So it's important to understand that the way that works, and one of the reasons the town has wanted to be eligible for friendly 40Bs and not developer-driven ones. Now, we have with us Virginia Bullock, who is the town staff person, who is one of our affordable housing experts. And I just wonder, Virginia, would you like to add anything to, no, I'm not seeing you raise your hand.
I just want to clarify one thing about what you just said, Betsy,
Sure.
which is that two things. One is another great example of 40B was the recently completed senior housing project at KI at 370
Yeah.
Harvard Street. So we haven't been able to celebrate that because of the pandemic, but it was a really great project and 100% affordable. 40B is really a tool to streamline the review process. And yes, it does allow developers to develop outside of our current zoning, but it is something that we can continue to use even after we meet the 10%. But once we meet as you were saying, once we meet the 10%, the town has slightly more control over what it will and won't accept in terms of these developments, including to the point that they may reject a particular development or make it very uneconomic. And at that point, once 10% is reached, the developer does not have the capacity to go to the state and appeal that decision. So it's really a tool, and it's sort of before and after the 10% is how it's implemented. So
yeah, Betsy, thanks for introducing Virginia. I'm sorry I failed to do that. The HAB would be up high and dry if we didn't have Virginia and her capable staff in the housing division to make these things happen. Most of the action is not with our voluntary board, but with the housing staff and the things they do. I and the HAB are very reliant on Virginia, and she's doing a terrific job for many years, by the way.
And there's a question in the chat asking about the slides being available. As I understand it, we are recording this, and our practice historically, where feasible, is that we work to create a version. In other words, it may have to be edited slightly, but still a version that can be shared through our Brookline interactive group, BIG. Ernie, is that accurate? We are recording this one. Sometimes it takes a little editing before it can be released.
Yes, we are recording it, and the recording will be available fairly shortly after we complete, but then we need to go through steps to get it over to Big and edit it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, Big puts its professional touch to it. And then we had a question or a comment from Linda Pelkey. Linda, I don't see you visibly on my screen, but if you're available, would you like to ask your question, make your comment? Linda?
Hi, Betsy. Yep, I'm here.
Morning, Linda.
I just wanted to clarify for everyone here what was decided at town meeting. And so warrant article 34 was a resolution that when it started had a very specific goal of a number of new housing units. And through the review process, that resolution was significantly modified, and the version that was adopted by the advisory committee, the select board, and town meeting overwhelmingly did not make the conclusion as a policy for the town that we wanted to go ahead with major housing construction. Instead, what it said was that we wanted to understand the impacts to the town, not just financial impacts, but physical livability, park impacts, infrastructure impacts, streetscape impacts. And we have not seen that study. We have not looked holistically at the town. And from my perspective, these goals and conclusions are way ahead of where the policy discussion is in this town. So I think that it was not accurate to say that the resolution concluded that we're going to do all this stuff, because it didn't. It said we wanted to know what the impacts are before we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I think, and I put back up a slide that, and Linda is essentially correct. There's maybe some nuance to that, but if the second bullet on the slide that I showed for the housing production plan, the analysis will consider, as you see, accessibility, neighborhood compatibility, climate sustainability, commercial area vitality, alternative uses, fiscal impacts, and other planning and citizen concerns. That is very critical. That is important. It's only a bullet here, but it was a really important part of the debate. It was not included in the Article 34 sponsors proposal that was brought forward. There was a broad agreement that absent that, that was critically missing piece, that housing is not in a bubble by itself, and any development, in terms of decent planning, needs to consider all of these other items. Where there's maybe some gray area is, does this mean that we're going to go through a whole year with the housing production plan and the other studies of the planning department, and then say in early 2022, well, maybe we don't want to have any of this? Or does it mean we've done a really good job in all respects, and including these other essential concerns, not just fiscal, but all those others, and here's how we're going to proceed forward, and taking account of all those items, here is what our goals are. And Linda is also correct that, as I mentioned, the sponsors had 4 different iterations with the HAB in 4 meetings, modifying their proposal. Originally, it was brought to the HAB as a proposal to simply eliminate all single-family zones and zoning in town, and the HAB thought that was misguided, and they went back, and then they came with a very high quantitative goal, 7,700 units. The HAB told the sponsors, we love aspiration, but that's too aspirational. So the third trip to the HAB, the sponsors came with a goal of 3,300, and the HAB's reaction was, we really think the housing production plan and that process and that type of community engagement and taking account of these other items, that's the way to develop a housing goal. We asked the proponents not to have their article include such a specific quantitative goal without any real analysis, and they agreed, and then finally came back with an article that recommended this housing production plan. The debate then shifted, and quite properly, as Linda mentions, away from the HAB, where we're housing proponents. It shifted to the advisory committee and to the select board, where a lot more attention was given to how to frame adequate consideration of these other non-housing factors for the town and for the housing production plan. And so that's why we are where we're at. The only difference that I might agree right at the margin with Linda is, are we going to go through all this and say we might not want to do anything, and we went through and then we closed the book and put it on the shelf to gather dust, and we're not going to have housing goals, or are we going to end up taking account of all these things adequately with the community buy-in, that's part of it, and then move ahead?
I'd like to at least ask, and maybe Roger, you have some thoughts on this, but one thing was not mentioned that I know has been discussed in the town, and I believe is part of some proposed legislation that may or may not get signed by the governor, having to do with transit-oriented development. In other words, encouraging additional development, mixed use and for housing, in locations that are specifically, have specific good access to public transit. Do you have any comments to make about that?
Sure, we've been watching that very closely, and it's timely, but it's called the Housing Choice Bill. It's really not so much a bill as part of the governor's huge economic development bill. The housing choice component, the HAB has supported this. Basically, one of the largest impediments towards housing production, both in Brookline and nationwide, California for sure, has been restrictive zoning. In Massachusetts, zoning has always required a challenging 2/3 vote of approval to get anything relaxed or housing built. Great example of this. I mentioned that 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, we came to town meeting with a very modest accessory dwelling unit proposal. Looked like it was going to sail through all the boards and commissions, select board, everybody was on board. It went to a vote at town meeting, got a huge majority, but fell 4 votes short of 2/3. And it was another 10 years before we were able to get something as small as accessory dwelling units. So the governor's housing choice bill, it reduces that approval threshold for town meetings and city councils from 2/3 to 50% plus 1, a simple majority, for certain kinds of zoning that, and there's a list of what they are, but the commonality amongst them is that they relate to zoning that can increase allowable multifamily housing density within basically, I believe, a half-mile radius, a transit-oriented district of public transportation. Interestingly, one of the specific types of zoning that's mentioned in there, it's not the major one, but it specifically mentions accessory dwelling units. Fortunately, we were able to get that through with way beyond the 2/3, but it shouldn't have been necessary and it shouldn't have taken so long.
Okay.
Betsy, I actually have an answer to that question that you asked.
Oh, Linda. Okay, Linda Pelkey, please speak.
Yeah. So there's another piece in the bill that requires communities to zone for multifamily around transit stops. This isn't relevant to Brookline because we already have that, but it is going to be relevant to other communities in the region. Can I follow up on Roger's response?
I'm sorry, Linda, I don't think it requires them to. It allows them to vote with a simple majority to make it as of right or by special permit.
No, I don't think
That it won't impact, that's not my understanding, but the impact will not impact Brookline because that is already true in most of Brookline.
Yeah, well, I've seen it written differently, so we'll find out, but.
Okay, but I think we should at least be aware that it's the language of the legislation that makes the impact. And my own personal experience reading legislation is that what it says and what you think it says is not always exactly the same thing, for whatever that's worth. It usually takes lawyers to figure it out. Anyway, Linda, you have something else you wanted to speak about?
Well, just around the question of planning for Brookline in general and what the goals of the housing production plan seem to be. I would just say that I think we need to be more comprehensive in our land use decision-making, and we need to think about other uses at the same time and other goals in the town and other impacts. So my personal feeling is that this effort is not comprehensive enough, and I worry especially about the community involvement and the community engagement. And I think that's something that's been very challenging for Brookline, but I think it's something that we really need to do, and not just all the usual suspects. So to me, this is kind of like a partial effort that is not sufficiently robust. And I will say more on that in the future.
Okay, I saw someone else, I thought, with a question out there or comment. Anybody? No, no, maybe I misunderstood. Therefore, if there is nothing else that somebody would like to raise as a comment or a question, I think we may have come to the end. Whoops, I do have a hand. Joan Lancourt, you can unmute yourself, but I can try to unmute you. Let's see.
Did that unmute me?
Yeah, you do it yourself. Right, you did it. Whoops, you're muted again. Okay.
That work now?
Now you can speak.
Okay. I'm Joan Lancourt. I'm the chair of the Brookline Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. And specifically to the point that Linda just made about the need for more community engagement, the commission has just issued a community engagement plan for the town of Brookline. And that is in response to a warrant article from, I think, 2019 that was brought by Deborah Brown. And in that plan, there are extensive guidelines for engaging the community, as Linda said, not the usual suspects. So there's a lot of work being done on engaging the underrepresented parts of our community. And that's something that I think Building a Better Brookline is already working on, because we feel that those voices need to be in the conversation early on, not tacked on at the end, which is so frequently how it happens. So I think there will be a growing effort in town around community engagement, and particularly focused on the housing production plan.
Thank you.
Totally agree. And as you can see, task number one, it's very much on our screen.
Betsy, can I just add to that?
Yes, by all means.
So on,
Identify who you are first.
so Kaya Vanderseel, I am a member of the commission as well, and a town meeting member for Precinct 15. This community engagement plan will be discussed this Monday on MLK Day at the Inspo Expo, and I can send the link to the flyer for this so people can just join. We'll have some explanation of it. It'll be from 11 to 12. Just want you to know that that's coming, and anyone who's available can tune in. The Inspo Expo goes from 10 to 12, and people will be doing their crafts for the first hour, and then for the second hour, we'll be discussing the community engagement plan. Thank you.
Right, and just for the record, that will be followed by the MLK online at 1 o'clock. So
And
Monday will be a good day for people to, let's say, get engaged.
And just a little addendum to that, there, we will be discussing the portion of the community engagement plan that focuses on the community Bill of Rights. So I hope, thank you, Kaya, for mentioning that.
Well, we'll hope that everybody will be able to tune in on Monday. And I know the league has been circulating links to things. We can add the community engagement link to our other communications about Monday.
Terrific, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from people who are with us? Okay, yeah, I see a
Hillary.
hand. Hillary Pfizer, you must unmute yourself to speak.
Thank you.
There you go. All right,
Hi.
welcome.
Thank you. I have a question. I live in South Brookline, so we've been through the Hancock Village experience. I think I'm one of the few in the neighborhood who thought that we need more density. I think we need more density in our single family zones. And, you know, I think CHR was maybe doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. But one of the things that always comes up is school costs. And I'm just curious if Brookline, you know, it didn't seem like Brookline ever seriously engaged in looking at the 40S provisions under the state law so that you can get reimbursement for additional school enrollment if it causes actual costs to go up. And that often would, you know, it takes a very localized issue and keeps it local as opposed to becoming a townwide negative drumbeat. So in terms of, you know, how do we get some of this stuff done? The zoning is just a big fight about people who really, really, really want to keep their single family zoning. But there are other ways, I think, where we can, as a town, do a lot more on housing and mitigate the fiscal impacts. The other piece here is we're dependent on the 51 bus. So it's, you know, people use that as a reason to be against affordable housing rather than saying, okay, how can we do more housing and improve bus service? But I'm specifically curious about 40S and if the town would look at that. I don't know why it wasn't looked at in the
I
past.
can speak to that, or Roger can.
Yeah,
or
but
Betsy.
Virginia will. We have looked at it, and Virginia can add to, I think our last time we looked at it looked great on paper. It didn't appear to be significantly funded, but Virginia?
Well, my understanding is that 40S goes with 40R, which is the way to rezone a district to include a certain percentage of affordable housing in a particular area, which is certainly something that the town has talked about looking at over the years. And 40S is the payment that goes with that in terms of the number of units that are actually produced. There's a payment per student up to a certain amount. My understanding is that Brookline, because of the way it's funded and it being a foundation community, would not be eligible for those payments. But I think it's certainly something we would look at once a 40R was passed in Brookline.
I'm just saying it may be something to look at with the Metro Mayors Coalition and others.
Well, again,
that.
my understanding is that it goes with 40R,
Yep.
Which we don't have here in Brookline. We don't have a 40R district right now.
But we could have, correct?
Absolutely.
So just
Totally.
things to work on because obviously the
we-
governor is for more production. So this is a way to go back to him and to the legislature and say, if you want these housing goals met, here are some things that need to go along with it.
When I was talking about the zoning and going through the slides, I mentioned the term overlay district. And so the zoning discussions and the focus of the HPP is going to be far more than in a single family situation, even though that's covers a lot of land in Brookline. The mixed use and mixed income is going to have a lot to do with this. And one of the types of overlays, which, you know, is a plan for a very discrete, a small area, would be a 40R, I believe, would be considered as a type of overlay.
Mhm.
So that's very much a part of when we talk about zoning and zoning overlays. 40R is certainly a part of that.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think I'm going to say there's more to come. This is an initial conversation. The league may be able to host something that's a follow-up that will happen probably down the road, but just so that everybody understands, at least our springtime will probably be following on things that are coming before the voters in May. We have an election where there will be both town meeting members and select board members and others coming forward. In May, there will also be the CPA on the ballot and other items that were generated through town meeting. And the league will be thinking about how to do certain things like filing a warrant, which not everybody has experience with or knows how to do. And understanding better the framework of the Brookline town government. But we will certainly be more than prepared to revisit the status of this production plan going forward when there is something more to report. So having said that, thank you all for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again. We will continue to do the league. The league will do its best to try to help people understand all of these complicated things. And I'm going to say from my own personal experience, not one of them is not complicated. And every time we think we've come up with a clear vision, it's clear that we didn't have all the details. So we'll keep working on it. And we hope that you will be there to help us. Thanks so much. And we'll continue to be in touch and we'll see you again sometime, presumably on another Friday.
Thank
Betsy,
you.
thanks for all you've done over the years and presently for affordable housing in various roles.